Hi, this is Erika of the Knit Kind podcast and Grapefruit and Gardenia Designs. I was thinking about topics for my next podcast, and I thought that one that might be interesting is mosaic color work. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. Now, you can find my projects that I talk about on Ravelry under the username NittyElf40. I thought I would talk about mosaic for a couple of reasons. I see a cattail coming through, so I think we have a little visitor here. One is I really love stranded color work, but not everyone does. So I'm going to come back to why we can talk about mosaic in the context of stranded color work in a little bit. But first I wanted to just talk about it generally. And I have a pattern out now, as well as a number of my patterns that use mosaic color work. So for those of you, I keep getting glare, I might take these off. Then we won't have glare. You just won't be able to see as well. For those of you who have heard of my Nourishment cowl, there is going to be a knit along with Junction Fiber Mill in January. Kits are available on their website now, and it uses mosaic. And this is the Nourishment cowl pattern. And I realized that when I talk about the cowl, I don't always say first that it's mosaic color work. And that matters to a lot of people because there are a lot of people who don't enjoy stranded color work. So mosaic is only working with one color at any given time. And some people will almost say it's akin to working one row twice because you're slipping stitches in order to get that effect of having more than one color in one row or round. Many times mosaic knitting can also make a denser fabric. So that's not always the case, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. But it can make a denser fabric, and that's because you are slipping stitches. So you're taking one stitch and pulling it over multiple rows. It will also affect your row gauge and your stitch gauge. Often your stitch gauge, much like with stranded color work, can pull in a little bit. So one thing people sometimes do to compensate is to use a larger needle size. You don't have to control your tension necessarily as much as long as you're only slipping one stitch, sometimes two. But if you are slipping 3 or more stitches, that's where you'll have to be careful with your tension again as well. And then in your row gauge, it will compress because you're elongating really those stitches over multiple rows, but without necessarily having more yarn to pull. So those are some of the characteristics of the fabric that's made by mosaic knitting. And many of you have heard me and many other people speak about Barbara Walker. So Barbara Walker, of course, has only four stitch books, like stitch dictionaries with patterns to use. And she has a mosaic section in, I believe, volumes 1 and 2, and then has an entire book on mosaic. And so I'm bringing up Barbara Walker and her books because when I first started knitting, I did some patterns that technically were mosaic. I didn't really think of them that way because it was just slipping stitches. I thought of it more as slipped stitches rather than mosaic knitting. And then as you get deeper into what people might classify as mosaic knitting, you'll find more intricate patterns in terms of how colors are being used. And I've explored some things in my own designs and now recently found a book that talks about some of the things that I had sort of explored on my own. And I just read that introduction to that book yesterday, and I'm going to mention that. I got it out of my local library. I don't have it here, but it's upstairs. I should have brought it with me. I'll probably take a picture and insert it. And I will talk about that in just a minute as well. So I thought I would show you a few things. What I'm wearing is the Break and Tide cowl by Neilan, and that uses slip stitches. So you get this effect of having more than one color in a row. She also uses fisherman's rib, which is almost like a way to sort of cheat brioche. In a way, you're knitting into the stitch below. You can read, or maybe another time we'll talk about the similarities between fisherman's rib and brioche, because in a way that's similar to how I'm going to mention that mosaic and stranded color work sort of are the same and yet different in some ways. So this is, and I did do the tassel on the bottom. I really liked how that looked. Sort of retro vibe, but also funky and modern too. And I used some colors to kind of punch it up a little bit too. So that's Neilan's Break in Tide cowl. Now, a couple other examples to show you. Some things, we can start with probably one of the most well-known patterns out there, which is Nightshift by Andrea Knits, Andrea Mowry. She has the shift, which is a cowl, and the Nightshift, which is the full shawl. I did both. I actually thought I would like the shift better, and I like the Nightshift better, just in terms of what I wear. But they're both very, very nice. This one I knitted in Malabrigo Rios. You can see how the colors shift through there, and that is all Mosaic color work. And the shift cowl I did do in the spin cycle. So those are a couple of very well-known examples that most of you will have already seen of Mosaic color work. I also have done a few patterns by Susan Ashcroft. One is O Vienna. I'll try to insert that now because that was a gift to my mom. And that was a beautiful bandana-like cowl. Put it over your head, already sewn up the back. Really beautiful, that I did in a Biltmore wool yarn, which I believe is alpaca and silk. They are local to me on Cape Cod. And I used I can picture the yarn that I used with it. I think it might be a Cascade yarn. It's a beautiful single ply teal color. This is the other Susan Ashcroft, Murano Squares, which I have, I believe, shown before because I think I've worn it. This is, I also did with, I believe, an alpaca. It's an Ilmani yarn that was gifted to me by a friend. That's a really pretty cream color. And this is with a Malabrigo fingering weight, sort of between a fingering and a sport, one of their really, really soft blends that I think comes in a 50-gram skein. And I'm always putting more colors in a pattern than it calls for. So instead of just doing 2 here, I did 3 and made it sort of like a fade almost, or, you know, a color changing, where I did the one here that has more of the reddish background to purple and then to the green blue. And I think I repeated that up here. And I just really liked how that made it look a little bit different as well. So those are both Susan Ashcroft designs, and she does a lot of Mosaic work. A lot of times hers will be the same pattern over the entire piece, accessory, which is a really nice way to do it. And then I like to play in some of my designs with putting multiple Mosaic motifs all within one pattern. This one is the Dissent Cowl by Carissa Browning. And if any of you remember doing that, it was kind of a hot pattern back in 2021, somewhere around there. I used the spin cycle and a So Happy Jane yarn in Ross Poldark, which I've mentioned before, one of my favorite colors. It's very squishy and nice, and it is meant to look like the Ruth Bader Ginsburg collar that she wore. So that was a bit of a tribute to her. Another one that I thought I'd mention that I don't have, but I will try to insert, and I have knitted, is the Looking Glass Cowl by Jill DeMarco. And that one is really beautiful. It's in super bulky yarn, and it just, you can use 2 colors so that it almost looks like, well, it says looking glass, almost looks like stained glass windows. So those were a few I wanted to mention that I have knitted and recommend. And then if you're interested in Mosaic and my designs, you can look back. There's an entire episode on my Friluftsliv cowls, which all use Mosaic, and I'll just hold up a couple of them now to show you those stitches specifically, but you can watch that whole episode. This is the Windchill warning, and you can see the thorn stitch here in Mosaic, as well as the collar neck. And I also used that same thorn stitch in a matching beanie, which was a lot of fun to do. I really, really like the thorn stitch, and in fact have put it in my vest, which may eventually get published if I can figure out a few more things with grading at the largest sizes. This is another version of it. And you can see, so even though you've got 2 colors in one row, you are only using one at a time. So for people who might be either intimidated by or just not enjoy stranded knitting, mosaic knitting is a great alternative. This is an early prototype of my Wintry Woods cowl. It looks a little bit different in the final version, but the final version is out at a local yarn shop right now on display. My shoulder season, which has the mosaic throughout. Oops, I'm showing you the original side, which is not how it looks. It looks like this now. And the Swedish weave, which is sort of a hybrid between a stranded knitting and a mosaic. And then my September garden cowl. So those were all of my Friluftsliv cowls, all utilizing mosaic stitches and patterning. And then also what a lot of you are familiar with, my Aquinnah cowl. And this is all mosaic in the bottom as well. The top is lace, but I alternate colors. And that's where I'm gonna feed into a little bit of this Barbara Benson book that I recently discovered. And then this is the Nourishment cowl, one of them. Again, this Florentine frieze at the top is all mosaic. And then you're working in a single color the rest of the way. More Florentine frieze here, but that is all mosaic color work, and that is a pattern from Barbara Walker as well. So, why did I want to show you that? Again, it was to really highlight this idea that there's stranded color work and there's mosaic color work, and you might enjoy one more than the other. Some of them are used because of the fabric characteristics that you can give them, but I just thought it would be nice to talk about that today in reference to this Nourishment cowl knit along that's going to happen. And like I said, I love stranded color work, but if you are someone who doesn't, and you have tried some of either these patterns or others, or maybe you're going to try it for the first time, and you say, oh, I really like doing it this way, there are patterns out there where you can almost trick yourself or the person looking at it into thinking that you are doing stranded knitting, but it's actually mosaic color work. One of those I'm going to mention is called the Chunka-Toque, which is by Michele DuNaier, D-U-N-A-I-E-R. A couple of reasons I wanted to highlight this one in particular. One, I knitted it last year during the Knit for Food event that Laura Nelkin puts on, and it was a really fun one to do. And when I finished it, I thought for me, I would rather have knitted it stranded knitting. But for people who don't like stranded knitting, I'm going to insert the picture here. I don't have it because it's since gone to someone else. But you can look like you have done what you'll hear referred to as fair isle. It's not necessarily fair isle, it's just stranded knitting. And you can do that all with slip stitches. And that's what this pattern does. The other reason I want to highlight it is it's free to charity knitters. And what I absolutely love is that in Ravelry, you'll find it as a $3 pattern, and it's really the honor system. If you're going to be knitting it for charity, she gives you a code that you can use and you can have it for free. If you're going to knit it for yourself or to sell, which she says she is happy to have you do, she just doesn't want you to sell or reproduce the pattern, then she would ask you to pay the $3. So if you see it and you like it, please pay the $3 if you're not going to do it for charity. And if you are going to do it for charity and you would benefit from having a free copy of it, then by all means use her code. I think it's very generous and trusting in the fiber community that she's willing to do that. And so I think she's a great person to highlight in terms of a designer. It is done in a bulky weight yarn, so it knits up lightning fast. I did finish it during Knit for Food last year, even though it wasn't the only thing that I was working on. And I did have to take some breaks because, you know, the bulky yarn and the slip stitches, it's a little harder on you, but it goes so fast. It's finished with a really cute tassel, or you can put a pom-pom on it, which is what I did. And it's just a really adorable pattern. And if you like that method, you can be on the lookout, because I know other designers have used that same method to get that look, even within a colorwork yoke. Now, again, if I was gonna choose, I would choose the stranded. But I can stop saying that, because the whole reason I'm telling you about this is maybe you don't like the stranded. And you can choose to do a colorwork yoke with slip stitches. I will maybe think of doing a follow-up to this and put in a few other pattern suggestions for what those are. So those were really just the things I want to talk about in terms of mosaic knitting. I hope that you will check it out. Let me know if you like it, how you find it, if you're looking for any other tips and tricks. And before I let you go, some of those tips and tricks you'll find are in the Barbara Benson book that I mentioned. So part of what I have played around, and I have another pattern that's in tech editing now that uses a stitch pattern from a Barbara Walker book, but it almost does combine this idea of lace knitting and mosaic knitting. And I stumbled across, when I was looking at another book from my local library to check out, this book that she wrote. And I don't have the title of it right here. This is the one thing that I didn't totally write down, but the author is Barbara Benson, Benson. I believe it came out in 2017. I'm going to insert it into the video. And what I love is it's a very short introduction, but it is so meaty of what is in there. It tells you about, it compares the charts as they're written by Barbara Walker and how her charts in mosaic knitting for knitting flat can be read using the same line twice. So she calls that, I think, the Walker method chart. And then she explains in her charts how she had a passion for lace knitting and then wanted to put more color in it. And this is a lot of what happens to me. I really like, and this is why I'm drawn to like a Tiff Neilan pattern, or sometimes a Casa Pinka pattern. I'm trying to, Caitlin Hunter patterns that combine a lot of color work, be it mosaic or stranded or simply sections of color work, and texture. And to me, texture can include lace in a way because you're opening up areas of negative space. And so while that might not be a raised texture like a bobble or a pearl bump, it does give this different texture, layer feeling to your pattern. And I love things that thoughtfully and interestingly combine color and texture. And so Barbara Benson said that when she was loving lace for so long but wanting to insert more color in it, and all the reasons why stranded colors didn't work, because you're carrying a strand behind lace, and in lace you've got the open spaces, and when you're carrying something behind it, or you're having to twist your strands in order to catch floats and other things, it just didn't work with lace. She pursued more mosaic knitting with lace knitting. And so she's written this book. It's got, I might even have like 20 patterns in it. But what I find really interesting is the explanations that she has at the beginning. And it's everything from looking at combining your colors. My kitty wants to get in the rocking chair, so I'm going to make her a space. Combining the colors. So much like with stranded knitting, you are looking at where do I have the most contrast, the least contrast, is that okay for my design? She talks about hue and tone, and she doesn't go into depth because she said, many other resources have done that, which they have, but she does talk about it enough in the context of mosaic knitting that I think it's worth mentioning here. So I can hear some voices coming. I might get interrupted in a second and have to push pause, but I will wrap up so that we're done. The Barbara Benson book, definitely check it out. Very, very interesting if you like mosaic knitting and then you want to go a level deeper. I've got a cat making noise here and family making noise there. I've really got to wrap up. Here are my other finished objects before I go. I did another First Flurries hat. Again, I did this in fact, this one I did all in Jagger spun yarn from Maine. I've got to get the answer to that. But this is the Berwick Bulky. I believe the Berwick Bulky is a superwash wool. It is from a Maine mill, but is not exclusively Maine fiber, and it's just really squishy and nice. And I did this one in Vineyard colors, so Martha's Vineyard, their Vineyard colors are purple and white, and I am going to put a removable pom-pom at the top. It was a lot of fun. I needed something on my needles that I could carry in my bag the week before Christmas and have when I had downtime, and I didn't have a lot of things other than those Scandi Bears on my needles. And so this, if it's in a bag, it's fast. I knew I could finish it in a week and have something done. And then my other finished object was my little dark brown Scandi Bear in the red sweater to go with the one I showed on wasn't the last episode technically, we just called it a family chat or family talk. So I'll insert the picture here in case you missed that, of both Scandi bears that I finished. They went to my niece and nephew on Christmas Day. And then the one other thing that I hadn't showed you, which is not really a finished object, but it's a finished swatch, I think. I have to block it still. I might do a section on it of just reverse stockinette as well to check that gauge. But it is a swatch for Thea Coleman's Fog Cutter, which I have had forever. I say forever, for long enough in my queue, and I really do want to knit it. And this is the O wool. She calls for the O wool that is the blend between cotton and wool. I used the one that is all wool. I got this last year from Gather Here, which is a very nice, not just yarn shop, but a maker shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And every year for, I think, 12 years, they have put on a maker's market at the holidays, and I really wanted to support them. So I got that last year in the color Wood Dove. And I'm so sad that I'm only discovering it as it's already going out of business, closing. But the O wool squish spring factor, I just wish they weren't closing. I can't wait to knit the whole sweater. It's really, really beautiful wool. So that is my other finished swatch, finished project-ish. And I have wanted leg warmers for a long time too, so I'm not following a pattern. I'm just making myself some nice wool leg warmers with yarn that struck out from a project didn't match a project that I was gonna use it on originally very well, but it is one of these barber poled color changing yarns. And I am probably just gonna knit till the first one is out of yarn and then knit the second one. It is Queensland Brisbane yarn. And I also got this at a local yarn shop during a crawl one year, quite a few years ago. It's bulky weight, but it says to knit it on a 10 or an 11, and I'm knitting it on an 8. And I don't know, it might bloom a lot, but I've tried it on and I really like how the fabric is and how it will be. So I'm gonna have my little, I kind of keep thinking of Punky Brewster. Anybody out there who is of my age group who grew up in the United States might ring a bell. Well, Punky Brewster leg warmers that I'm gonna have. So that's it. I hope that you learned a little something about mosaic knitting, that maybe you'll jump in with us on the knit along in January. I think it technically starts January 7th. I'll put a link to that as well. And if you want to learn more about the Nourishment cowl, check out the episode I did specifically about that. It talks about the inspiration. It talks about all the different stitches that I used in there. It talks about the women who started the mill, Junction Fiber Mill, and it talks about their yarn. So we did that, little clips of our trip to Vermont, which I'll still have a part 2 of now that I can talk about the knit along, and probably show you some of the pictures of actually visiting one of the farms up there too, and seeing the sheep, and just really having it all come together in a way that is incredibly meaningful to me as a maker and a mom. So knit kindly, live kindly. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday if you celebrate, and if you're celebrating Kwanzaa, you're still having a wonderful holiday, and I look forward to being with you again soon. Take care.